Hello Ratbags, it's Jade with a mammoth Rust video today. Why? Because we're going to be taking a look at the potential for updates on console. If you don't know, Rust on console is going to be different from PC. That's why there is never going to be any crossplay. The console version is significantly behind PC if you take into account what Double 11 have said in their blog posts, that they chose a starting stable point for console and they'll iterate, they're going to add more content to it, but it might not be in the same way as PC, which received updates every month for the last 2 years and 2 and a bit years. Rust on PC has had so many changes, and I would argue it's only actually got as good as it is now in the last maybe 9 months to a year. Before then, Rust really was kind of just this niche game that was liked by a lot of people but hated by reviewers, hated by game sites, and so a lot of people couldn't really get into it. They improved that a lot massively when Face Punch, the PC developers, got their whole team working on Rust instead of putting them on different projects. That happened about 2 and a bit years ago, and it took a bit of time to gel, and then they suddenly started taking over Ark. Ark has always been the #1 most played survival game up until 2019, the end of it. That's when Rust started to overtake. That's when Rust started to have more daily players playing. Sure, Ark has gone through some stages with better DLC or bigger updates, and they've had a bit of a spike, but Rust was still on an average basis beating Ark on a daily basis because the game was just quite frankly good. All them updates they've had have actually significantly gone into it, and so getting them updates on console is going to be hard. Some of them are going to be quite challenging. So I'm going to list all the updates that Rust has had since it came out of early access. We're going to try and surmise where or whereabouts the console version is and what's the likelihood of getting some of the content afterwards. Obviously it's not going to follow the same PC route. They may bundle stuff together, and I'm going to explain some of that too. So make sure you like, make sure to subscribe for the best in no biased BS Rust content. Let's go through the updates that made Rust and what potentially console might have. So in March 2018, they brought in the Spaz shotgun and the chainsaw. They also gave a sneak glimpse at the future of helicopters, where they were still toying around with it just being NPC, or whether or not you'd actually be able to ride in it with a pilot view. So chainsaw and Spaz, is that the starting point for Rust? Is that what we expect to see in console? I would say they're both pretty basic items. If they're not in the console version, I fully expect to see them added very, very soon. Maybe more of an indication of where we're at with the console updates is taking a look at April's update, which added boats. We've already seen from the gameplay that Double 11 released showing players on boats, so we know for a fact it's already in the console version. So the updates must be later than April 2018. Another big addition alongside the boats was the Chinook event. This was a helicopter that would go around the map, periodically dropping off its load at different monuments. You then have the usual time that you would to try and unlock it, keep away from other players, and hopefully get that sweet loot and away before the end of the event. The Chinook is dangerous. It will shoot any players nearby as it's dropping off its load. So I think it's safe to assume that alongside the boats, the heli, the Chinooks, we're going to get water junk as well. This will all be in the console version. And as well as improvements to hair, the map, as well as forest improvements with foliage, this was the first glimpse at upcoming puzzles for the monuments. At the start of May 2018, this is when they introduced the compound. This is where you could go and sell items as well as buy lots of new stuff, all protected by the scientists that wouldn't shoot you as long as you didn't have any sort of weapon in your hand. You definitely didn't want to get on the wrong side of these. No sleeping, no killing, no having your dick in your hand, no, your weapon in your hand as you explored the outpost and hopefully got maybe a bit of a head start by selling all your wood and getting some decent resources or a DB. They also added diving gear, the first iteration anyhow. It's undergone a few changes since then. You can see it looks very much more sort of vanilla before they rustified it up as you explored lots of wrecks. Now we're starting to see real key items that are a mainstay of Rust nowadays, and that's monuments. They were added back in June 2018. The monuments are powered by electricity and keycards. You need to normally activate a doorway by getting power to it, by activating 3 switches, sometimes with fuses are also needed, and then you also need the right correct keycards to gain access to some of these areas. They'll normally open up usually one room, and there will be some decent loot inside, usually military grade. Things like the launch site, which we've seen in the Xbox gameplay that they showed off a little while ago. Lots of these places have always been in the game or for a while, but now you needed extra steps to get the loot that was hidden in. And that's effectively what the puzzles were, and hopefully we will be seeing these, since obviously we've got the monuments and you can see some power lines in the distance when you take a really good deep look at some of this gameplay. Now again, they've always kind of been there, but we're hoping that that is actually indicative that there are the puzzles and the monuments that you expect. And finishing off that update was the first glimpse of Bandit Town. This wouldn't be implemented until a good few months later, but we kept seeing glimpses of it in these vlogs. Now by now you're probably wondering, Jesus, can't you just tell us when you think it's going to be? Well, I am trying to give the people that don't really understand how Rust has worked or progressed over the years a bit of an overview. But a big clue as to the starting off point for Rust could be the implementation not of the jackhammer but of the compass. This got added as part of the team update in July. It had made the UI much simpler and easier to add people to your groups, and it did add the compass. We've already seen from that gameplay again from the Xbox and the PS4 that it is indeed in the game. So that's what we can kind of assume. All the content up until July will be there all for the console players when the beta and the full game launches. Somewhat weirdly, this was controversial at the time. Players didn't want an ability to have a team. They preferred the method of pretty much just being open to all, and it added a bit more immersion. Alongside the watchtower and some additions to the ambience of the graphics of the game, it was a small update but a pretty substantial one. And since we have seen some of that team UI in the console version videos already, again, it's another safe bet to assume that from this point we had all that content as well. But wait, there's more! Go to August 2018 and this is when the Bandit Town was added to the game, and we know for a fact that this is included in the console beta version because there is a few shots of the Bandit Town in distance in the trailer for the consoles that came out a few weeks ago. So I think it's fairly safe to say that all the trappings that you find in the Bandit camp, like the wheel where you can bet your own scraps and try and strike it lucky, as well as possibly a recycler being added into there, although not a given as the recycler was only added the next month later as they kind of forgot to add it in, but there will be all the merchants there that you should be able to buy stuff from. Again, presuming they're following exactly the PC update that launched in August 2018. Now, certain things were added over time. It's only recently though that they added more single slot machines and of course the card games of poker, so don't expect them to be there just yet, but you never know. But here's where things get a little bit interesting or spicy. When you've taken a look at the trailers for console so far, they've shown the boats, but they didn't show the RHIB spawns, i.e. the brand new upgrade for the boat that could hold up to 8 players. And I would say that if you're making a trailer, you would probably want to show all the most advanced stuff and the most badass looking stuff. In the trailer of the Xbox gameplay, it pretty much shows them on a boat coming up to shore and then going and taking on a Bradley at launch site. But it doesn't show the RHIB. So my point is, are we only getting some of the stuff from that update, and is that pretty much where we're at with the console version of the game? Given it's nearly May and we're probably only a few months away from obviously August, quick maths, that means we're nearly 3 years out in terms of what the console possibly could have. Now maybe they just didn't use the RHIB, maybe there was a last minute issue, or maybe they wanted it to seem a bit primitive to hold back some stuff. We don't know for sure, but bearing in mind these videos went up with IGN, I got a feeling that when they're showing these kind of media outlets that have done this kind of stuff before, they would have been showing them the latest content that they had rather than maybe gating off anything. This update also brought the compound bow, and it did make some team changes as well. They also added a little bit more refinement to farming, and they added the swamp mini biome, not a safe friendly place like the other swamp. This one just has a smaller few cabins and just pretty much a place to go and get some sulfur and maybe some wood if you're really desperate. As said, it might not prove anything that they're using this boat, but that's what I'm going to go with, and I'm going to say that the version we're going to get might not be too far away from the summer version of Rust from 2018. Based on the only public available information we have, the trailers and the gameplay. After this they had the performance update and the cargo ship update, which added the next event into the game, which is obviously a big massive cargo ship which you can go and get loot from periodically. You'd have to jump on by climbing on a ladder, no maybe getting a helicopter down on this one, not yet anyhow, and then you'd fight out with other teams or other players if they were trying to attack it at the same time, while you faced off against more scientists on the ship to try and get loot. They also added the L96 rifle, a brand new scope, the tactical gloves and a few more other smaller pieces. Now the cargo ship itself only appears for a certain period of time, every few in-game days, and everyone can pretty much hear it coming. It does appear on the map as well. Is the cargo ship going to be in the console version? Who knows? I definitely feel like we haven't seen enough hype or enough videos showing some of this cool stuff, and if we haven't seen some of this really cool stuff as yet, can it actually be in the actual beta or the full version? Now one thing I need to address, there is going to be some people that say, well, it might be in the beta but it will probably be in the full game. Long are the days where there were substantial changes from betas to actual proper game. Betas come out now as just marketing tools. As we've seen, as you guys know, I'm pretty unhappy with the way 011 have done the pre-orders and the betas. You can go and check out previous videos if you want to hear more about that. So I don't really view betas as anything more than just that marketing. We've seen from games like Anthem and Fallout 76 that they really are the final product more or less. Yes, there will be some bugs. Yes, there will be some things that get reported and hopefully they can fix them by the time they launch, but generally the days of a beta being put out there months and months in advance and then us getting a chance to really affect that game are long overdue. It's all usually just about testing the servers and testing any last minute hitches. And that is usually the last and final build of the game, albeit any last minute day one patches they can put into it, and that doesn't normally mean adding a shit ton of new content. So whatever the beta comes out as, whatever the beta has got in it, expect that to be pretty much the full game launch when it comes out on May the 21st. Next after that, in November and December, we had the hot air balloon and electric. Now this is a huge deal. This really opened up the game to the idea of more traps, and this was one of the first aerial transports. Before the minicopter, the only way to get across the map quickly and by air was by the air balloon. Part of the update also was significant improvements to physics of water and a bunch of other smaller little quality of life additions. And of course, since the hot air balloon is now in there, you also need some protection for your bases, and this is when they launched the SAM site, so you can literally have a rocket launcher on top of your base to take out anyone trying to jump in off of one of these balloons. They also placed these all around certain monuments, so it'd make it even harder for you to gain some of the loot from some of these places. And then in December, celebrating 5 years of Rust conception, they added the electricity update. Switches, gateways, laser beam detectors, logic gates, you name it, it was all there to make a functioning proper electronical kit. As the years have gone by since then, they have added more and more that needs to be supplied by electricity. At one point you could have all your auto turrets using nothing but just themselves. Now you have to run them off electricity, and the SAM site also got added to be needing some sort of electrical current to use as well. Trap bases would never be the same again. So you got to ask yourself, is electricity a simple thing to have, especially when you've got all these other systems running and on console? Well, kind of, yeah. Our Survival Evolved has electricity, Astroneer has some sort of power, No Man's Sky has it as well. It's maybe not as hard as you think to implement, so there could be a chance that it is in the console version. Although from the screen footage we've seen of the actual gameplay when they did a raid with the IGN crew, it didn't look like there was any sort of traps like that inside, and certainly no indications that electricity was a thing. But then again, that video was put together pretty quickly by the looks of things, as the IGN crew playing were pretty terrible when it comes to shooting other players. So take that as you will, but electricity I don't think will be necessarily a huge problem getting into the game. Maybe the system does have to compensate more, but as I said, so many other survival games manage it perfectly okay. Next we're on to something that I think console may struggle with, and that's air power, i.e. the minicopter, as well as obviously the big one later on. Simply put, whenever you've had vehicles in a game, and something that Conan Exiles had problems with when they added horses, they found that the speed of players would mean that, pretty much like Minecraft back in the day, you would run faster than the game could load in. In Minecraft it was the chunks, in Conan Exiles it was the world terrain as well, but Ark Survival Evolved hasn't had as many problems with that except for a few creatures that almost teleport. That's when you've had problems with the world loading in. So on old gen consoles, having lots of aerial vehicles could potentially be some sort of issue, and I think that no matter if it's in there or not, there'll be problems with the vehicles for a while until they can polish and refine it. That's if they are in the game. If not, I guess hopefully it means they've got more time to balance and check and see if they can get these vehicles working correctly. They weren't the only things that were added though. We got RF receivers and a bunch of other cool little things to help protect your base, or at least alert players that you were getting raided. The air power update was one of the big ones kicking off 2019, and this also started to mark a change for Rust when they started to think about getting their team all together to work on Rust completely. Until then, they had their teams working on previous little side projects, and they found that they just weren't getting anywhere with them, and so they put the whole team on Rust, and that's when Rust really kicked it up a notch. It went from being a game that just suddenly launched out of early access, that had been a cult hit, to something that really people started to get behind. This is when the game started to climb above Ark Survival Evolved on a daily basis, apart from some usual little DLC announcements or hype, and quickly, even with that, Rust would still reclaim top spot for the most average amount of players playing the game. I use Ark as the benchmark because they are simply, or were, the biggest seller on PC. Previous count was, last I heard, 9 million. Rust have only just hit 9 million recently, so they were the ones to beat if they wanted to be the king of survival on a PC platform. Even if you don't really think Rust is a survival game, that's what it's classed as. And so you can really start to see the difference. The content that was coming out every month was much more bigger, better, more refined, and really pretty much just more interesting. The oil rig update was part of that. In March 2019, a brand new monument, heavy scientists, huge changes to the ocean, and really a big challenge, and where the majority of loot would be gotten in the future for endgame content. I'll say it again, since we've not seen any sign of this stuff in any of the trailers or the gameplay, it does make me think that this kind of content won't be in the console version of the game. I really hope it is. I really hope they've been just holding it back for the full release to give everyone something really to look forward to, but I would say it would be a big part of marketing, having the endgame content, as Rust knows it now, to be in there. I can't really see any technical problems with having this. You've got monuments like you have everywhere else. Maybe the water complicates stuff, having a monument pretty much slap bang in the middle of a water biome and all the meshing that you have to worry about. Or maybe it's got something to do with the AI pathing and pretty much how it's broken. They don't want players being able to cheese certain things. So we don't know. It could be a surprise, or it's just simply not in the console version yet. If it's not in there yet, I fully expect it to be added in the very first few months, as I think players will be crying out for this as one of the most important content drops to be added. I think it goes without saying that electricity also fits into that category of most wanted too. A month or so later, they added the large versions of the oil rig, much harder, a bit more complex, and obviously lots more enemies and pathways to go, and the grenade launcher, the first edition, was added at this time. Remember I said about adding electricity to certain things? This is when the SAM site absolutely needed electricity to run, and they also added the combat knife too. This was when I really started to take notice of Rust as well, being a content creator that had been covering Ark, Conan, and of course DayZ up and coming, as well as having quite successful games like The Forest do well for me, and a bunch of others too. It was Rust that I was starting to look forward to. I kept seeing more and more about these developers updating their game every single month with free content and only selling MTX skins that really didn't affect gameplay. I felt this was a great model, and I wish so many other survival games took it on board. In June, they started to add rideable horses. They've been in the game a long time, but they've been nothing much but runaway meat. Now you could actually ride them, and in future updates you would be able to put harnesses and armour on them. That was nerfed, buffed, changed, chopped. For a few months they added hitching posts and other items like the trough as well, and made major improvements to the minicopter and a few other smaller little additions. In August 2019, they added the excavator. This was a brand new monument that would absolutely speed up the process of getting higher quality metals. Quite complicated, you needed probably a team of 4 to really get it going and protect your loot, and you would have to take out all the scientists that guarded it. This really started to show the scale of stuff that was going on. If you thought about the helicopters and other vehicles being problems in other games, then horses I don't think would maybe be as bad. Again, it all just depends on the memory usage. As I said, Conan Exile struggled with this, hence why it took him so long to add mounts, and it does look like Rust had similar issues. So on console, I do fear if it's running around how good or how bad it's going to be having vehicles, having creatures that you can ride. It is an challenging, intensive game. It is one of the biggest and the most pretty much RAM eating games out there, even amongst survival games, which are always pretty harsh. But that said, they've had 3 years. Ark was ported over to Xbox within 5 months. Of course, they iterated it over time. Conan Exiles was ported over within 8 months. DayZ, from the time they revamped their engine and the time they put it out on the Xbox Game Preview, that took 9 months. I'm not saying these games were great, I'm just saying that the time to port them hasn't been as long as it's taken Rust. And then at the end of August to kickstart September, we had the Transport Helicopter update. This was now the de facto way to get your group across the map at higher speed. Eventually you'd be able to buy one from the Bandit camp, otherwise known as Airwolf. But this changed the game for a lot of players, and it pretty much had a dedicated montage in every Rust RPG story maker as it flew overhead. Other changes to auto turrets and lots optimizations were always the order of the day. Goodbye air balloon, hello big chunky copter. Now, before we cover some of the more chunkier updates that bring us up to 2020, it's important to recognise that a lot of the UI changes that we have seen with Rust on PC, which happened towards the end of 2019, they do appear to be in the console version. When we've taken a look at some of the stuff that's been going on, it hasn't really shown the maps as such, but some of the other stuff does look like it's much more present. And this might be the case. Having more up-to-date UI is something that you could probably implement fairly easily on the console version without it upsetting lots of systems. So yeah, it wouldn't be too surprising to see that kind of stuff much more in line with the Rust we know and love today, rather than some of the other updates that might take a bit longer. The modular update though, that hit in February 2020, and it was pretty much being able to put any sort of gun onto any sort of turret, and you could just literally create so many different types of traps and defenses. Part of this update also was adding finally the ring road to the game, so it all matches up properly. And again, this might be a component from some of the footage we've seen that shows this has made it into maybe the console version. The CCTV update in March 2020 added the ability to literally appear outside your base by using the cameras. Now, these have been actually in the game for a long time, but it took so long for them to actually wire up the CCTV so you could actually take advantage of it properly. Believe it or not, I think this kind of system might actually struggle on consoles, because it's a system within a system. It's offering another fixed camera viewpoint, and this can be quite taxing on systems and RAM as well. In fact, these 3 months had pretty decent updates, really chunky stuff, including the Farming 2.0 update. This had a whole brand new system alongside it, so you could grow crops perfectly with water sprinklers and all sorts of stuff. Growable potato seeds as well, composter, and just a lot more. Again, this is kind of common garden for a lot of survival games, but it's taken Rust this long to really get this system implemented. Given that some of these systems like electricity aren't as complicated, I feel, considering they're in so many other games, I am wondering whether or not the water and the farming situation will be as easy to implement, since it has got many more moving parts, and I think there's a lot more tax in the systems if you've got loads of things, crops growing and water actually coming out. That must tax a lot on the CPU and the GPUs. So yeah, if it's out there, if it's in the game at launch, fantastic. Adds another element, another layer for role players, as well as just being able to sustain yourself a lot more and maybe make more use of some of the crops and food items, as it's not really a huge survival game anymore when you take into account how little you have to actually eat and drink sometimes. But I don't see this as a necessity, and I still think that if it's not in the game at launch, it may be sometime before we see farming added, as I reckon there's just lots more priorities. And then we had the night vision update in May, followed by vehicles at the end of the month. In fact, this was almost like a 2-week update that happened, and it added a bunch of new stuff. With that night vision update, you had electric heaters, more additions and balances to the farming, as well as new spiral stairs and a lot more. And possibly in preparation for them vehicles, we started to see much more about ramps, so that we could actually maybe start doing certain stunts and stuff with the incoming cars. Around this time, they also launched the app for mobiles where you could literally decide if someone was raiding you or not, or find out, or communicate with your team and do a hell of a lot more. I can't see that being a priority either. If it's not there at launch, or we've not seen any tips or plans about it, I wouldn't expect this for a while either. And then something I don't think console's going to get for a long time. Again, it could all be wrong. Maybe they really did only show IGN one of their builds from months and months ago. But as they've stated, a lot of the content will be added in over time. So I think it's fair to assume that vehicles are not going to be in the console version, and it's going to be some time before they're added. I've stressed enough, hopefully, to you guys that vehicles, if you take into account other games like DayZ, how much trouble, how many problems the game has had computing exactly something that's fast moving. With all the parts that make up vehicles, the way that you build them out of modular parts, the components you have to put inside them, I see vehicles as a massive undertaking, and I just don't know if the consoles will be able to support it. Given as well that the console maps may end up being smaller because of the RAM usage, that's how they solved the problem for a lot of low-end users on PC. They recommended you only play on smaller maps. I can't actually see much need for vehicles and cars. It's really only that beneficial for the bigger maps or for definite role players. I'm not a huge expert on Rust on PC, I don't put thousands of hours into it, but what I can see from the community that I've seen is that cars have actually just become a nice thing to look at and to play around with once or twice, but not necessarily the be all and end all. They maybe haven't had the impact that Facepunch actually thought they might in terms of getting teams across the map. Lots of them are still preferring to use helicopters or just simply going out on horses. So yeah, don't expect vehicles on console for a long time. 2020, we had the mixing table update. This was the ability to create teas. We're right in my ball game now. I love a good cup of Rosie Lee, and the ability to make these buff giving items, growing new berry plants and stuff as well, was a really new cool feature. Again, I've not seen too many people use it because I don't actually watch too much proper Rust PvPers. It's more the role player ones that I watch, but certainly it could have a place, and I think this is the kind of thing that might be implemented on console a bit sooner than something like the vehicles. Effectively, if I was Double 11, I would want to get the easy stuff out the way, the stuff that doesn't tax the systems, stuff that can add benefits like tea, like farming, like electricity, over the more complicated things that have much more risk of breaking a game, like vehicles. We had the boat vendor update. Simply put, it allowed you to buy different types of boats and hopefully get some more resources to gather from them wreckages all around the water that had improvements as well. Did also add the brand new kayak, and again, that kind of stuff I just don't expect to see in the game if it's not there already at launch for a while. I consider this alongside vehicles as being something quite complicated to add. Maybe not the actual point position or the point of interest, but more the ability to actually use like the kayak and the different boats. Then some smaller updates after such a big hectic summer where they added things like the elevator, which pretty much gave you the option to really travel and create new things for your bases, as well as a whole host of improvements to the network and just helping with lag and desync and stuff. So updates and elevators, maybe not for a while. And then we've got something again tied with the horses, and this is what I think they'll end up doing. They'll put the horse stuff all together, so horses will be able to be rideable, we'll have the stables, and we'll have all the armor in one update. It just absolutely makes sense with the ability to pick and choose these updates and put some of them together a bit better. I imagine this all comes to console at the same time. And then really we're into the realms of the last 6 months, so don't expect to see any of this stuff in console for a long time unless they really do prioritise it and realise that the tech tree could be something really decent to have in the game if it's not already in there. I mean, if I was Double 11 and I was picking and choosing these updates, I would have absolutely made sure that I had the tech tree in the console version. So yeah, fingers crossed, maybe they've added it. But it is relatively new. They only added this in December 2020. It allows even solos the chance to really start unlocking a lot of stuff rather than relying on RNG. Pay some scrap, buy the blueprints that you want, work your way down to some of the end game items rather than always having to worry about coming up against groups. It really does help solo and smaller clans better against some of the larger zergs. This was one of the few times they've wiped blueprints over the years, and you guys know I'm pretty upset that people have got access early to the servers with 3-day access for console, because they will be able to keep these blueprints for a long time unless Double 11 are going to go through some major changes. Blueprints on Rust are kept for like years in some instances, but they wiped all the blueprints when they added this tech tree update to make it fair for everyone starting off. February saw the start of the softcore servers Basically, you keep some of your items when you're killed. They'll be left for you back at one of the outposts in special sort of mini vaults for you to collect, and it's just a nicer, easier way. This was all because of feedback from a lot of streamers, seeing the game being played by really popular streamers that have played a lot of different games but maybe not sunk that much time into Rust. Facepunch realised that the onboarding for people in Rust is pretty terrible. It's been their biggest criticism for years, in fact, that new guys to Rust often just switch it off because it's so hard to get into. There's absolutely zero tutorials. They removed the ones that they did have, and it's just a hard game because of the nature of it being so toxic and PvP focused. So the idea to go and reclaim some of your items is fantastic, and I really hope this is in the console version or it does get added. But considering there's so many other updates, so much other content that will be added, again, I don't think this will be a priority for a while. Instead, I can clearly see that Double 11 are going to have different types of servers. They'll have servers with extra gather rates, they'll have servers that wipe more frequently, they'll have limits on clan sizes. That's the kind of thing they'll do until they can implement something like this. Of course, drones were also added around this time as well, and then after that we had the freight train, transit line, and the gestures update, which added poker, proper card games, and the smaller slot machines to the Bandit camp. So a rather lengthy video. Hopefully I've explained adequately what to expect, what not to expect, based on some of the limited information I have, and basically just give you a heads up of everything that's gone into Rust and maybe how hard some of this stuff might be to implement on consoles. I can see drones being an issue, I can see the freight train never coming to console, I can see gestures and card games possibly being something that could be added over time, but for sure I think there could be some instances where we just won't see the same content. We won't maybe ever see the transit line come. I think vehicles and cars, that might end up being an update that can only be applied to next gen consoles. This is the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at Rust and its future. Agree, disagree, go ahead, just give me your opinion, just make sure it's not rude, and I'll see you hopefully for more Rust content in the future.